Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Breaking Barriers, Women in Construction webinar series brought to you by AIA Contract Documents. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a few administrative items that I'd like to go over before we get started. So let's go ahead and go through those. This presentation is protected by U.S. and international copyright laws. Reproduction, distribution, and display without written permission of the speaker is prohibited. You will receive the PowerPoint along with the recording of today's session via email this week, so you can look forward to that. I've also uploaded the few PowerPoint slides that we have in your GoToWebinar webinar panel on the right-hand side. And then speaking of your GoToWebinar panel, there is a section for chat and questions. I recommend if you have questions throughout our interview today, please go ahead and enter them in the chat, and we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. Here's a disclaimer that's on all AIA contract documents, education, and webinars. This presentation and materials are always provided for general informational purposes only. This is not ever provided as legal advice. This program is registered for one learning unit with the American Institute of Architects for continuing professional education. When you registered for the course, you entered your AIA member ID if applicable, and we'll use that information to report your credit by the end of the week. You can also contact us after the webinar if you need a certificate of attendance. This is the vision of the program. So Breaking Barriers, Women in Construction is a new webinar series. We had our inaugural session last month where we featured Lakeisha Woods. So this is a webinar series where we would like to feature women leaders in our industry who share their experiences, their lessons learned, insights, and our goal is to educate and inspire. So thank you for joining us. Please join on our future sessions as well, and I'll talk a little bit at the end of the program about the next session that we have coming up. My name is Hasti Hijazi. I'm Education Director with AIA Contract Documents, and I've been working with the AIA Contract Documents education program for over 10 years. And I'll be moderating today's discussion and also moderating the questions at the end of the session. So with no further ado, our featured presenter today is Lauren Nunnally. She is Senior Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer at Swinerton. So Lauren has a very impressive resume. I'm going to read a little bit about her bio before we get started, and then we'll get to know her a little bit more during the session. So Lauren, as I mentioned, is Senior Vice President at Swinerton and Chief Administrative Officer. She has 16 years of construction experience. She's received her bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering from the University of Virginia and her MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She started with Swinerton in 2005 as a project engineer, and she stayed there for 8 years and then went on to complete her MBA. And after completing her MBA, she returned to Swinerton as director in the Business Technology Department. And then she created a new corporate department called Craft Services, which enabled the expansion and profitability of Swinerton's self-perform operations with a heavy emphasis on craft recruiting, training and development, productivity, and optimization of all craft-related processes. In 2019, she assumed the role of Chief Talent Officer, where she was responsible for Swinerton's talent strategy for all 4,500 plus administrative and craft employees, which is very impressive. And with the passion for culture, talent acquisition, leadership development, succession planning, and the employee experience, she worked to align talent strategies with Swinerton's global business objectives. She's now currently Chief Administrative Officer. I think she assumed that role in 2022. So with no further ado, let me stop sharing my screen and we are going to start our discussion with Lauren. So Lauren, thank you first of all so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
So we're going to start off this hour discussion. I want to first really get to know you and your journey, your career development, your journey at Swinerton. So can you actually start off first by just telling us about your education and professional background and what attracted you to the construction industry to begin with?
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about my education. I got my undergraduate degree and master's in civil engineering with a focus on structural engineering at UVA, go Hoos. And then I also got my MBA at the Wharton School here in Philadelphia. And so as far as what made me join the industry, I think that's a much more interesting story. My dad owned a small construction company in Virginia, in the town where I grew up. And so I kind of grew up around construction. I grew up playing with scrap wood and nailing things together, which probably wasn't that safe for a child, but that's how I grew up. And then in high school, spent some of my summers as a laborer on some of my dad's job sites. So it was basically free child labor for him. But I really enjoyed, being outside and all the things that you could see the industry brought. I really thought I wanted to go into construction as a younger age, but my dad pushed me into engineering as far as a major. UVA didn't have a CM program at the time, which they do now, but they didn't then. And I liked math, so I went the engineering route. I stayed and got my master's mostly so I could prolong college because I loved it there, but also did something productive with it and getting my master's in engineering. I actually interviewed with a couple of structural engineering firms. I knew I wanted to move from Virginia to San Diego. I just wanted something different, and interviewed with a couple of structural engineering firms. And I had one interview in particular that was really impactful for me. I made it all the way through the interview, and the gentleman said to me, he goes, if you want a job, I'll give you the job. Clearly you could do the job. And he goes, but I just don't know that you're gonna like this job. And he goes, you just seem like kind of an extroverted person. You like creativity. And he goes, a lot of our engineers, they're just different personalities, and you ought to really think about construction, looking at construction before you commit. So I actually flew back out to San Diego and did another round of interviews with a bunch of construction companies out there, and found Swinerton and never left except to get my MBA. So that's kind of how I got into the industry, just growing up around it, and like probably most people in the industry. So yeah.
Excellent. So again, you've had a very interesting Swinerton journey, and the company is a fantastic company for you to continue going back, right? So I'm very interested to know what kind of programs they have and your experience there. But let's start with the multiple positions you've had within Swinerton. Kind of tell us a little bit more about your journey and how you kind of elevated through the ranks and what that looked like.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to talk about career journeys, particularly those like mine that have been a bit circuitous. So I started, when I started at Swinerton, they asked me if they were starting an estimating rotation, and they said, would you like to try it? And I was like, I don't know what it is, but sure, let's do it. I was open to it. I knew it was numbers. So I actually started out in estimating for about a year and a half. And then I went out into the field as a project engineer and kind of worked my way up pretty quickly to project manager, and was running work with our San Diego group for about 8 years. And then I left to go get my MBA. A lot of the leaving had to do more with personal reasons than professional. But I really loved Swinerton, and I was bummed to leave, even though I had a great opportunity to go to business school. So while I was in business school, I kept in touch with a lot of the folks, the leadership at Swinerton, and they asked if I'd be interested in coming back. And I said, well, what do you have in mind? Because I don't know, I'm more interested in sort of the business side of things. I don't know if I want to go back into project management or be a project executive. So at the time, they recognized that technology was really taking off in our industry, and we were not well positioned as a company to ride that wave. We had IT over here and operations over here, and not only did they not talk, they didn't like each other. So our executive team asked if I'd be interested in coming back and working with some of the leaders in what we now call business technology, in the business technology group, to sort of rebrand, reorganize, and refocus IT on the business of construction. And that was a really interesting challenge for me and an interesting opportunity. Kind of funny because I knew nothing about IT, but it was, when you think about all of the applications and software and programs and things that we use to get work done, it's more and more about technology. So I ended up doing that for about, I want to say 3 or 4 years. And all the while I was really passionate about the talent side of the business. And so was kind of talking about that as my side job to anyone that would listen. And then we really started growing our self-perform operations right around that time. So one of our executives asked if I would be interested in helping to lead and build a new department dedicated to all things craft. And that I thought was a really interesting opportunity. So I jumped on board with that and we built that new department out. And then that sort of grew into overseeing talent for the whole organization, which grew into overseeing corporate responsibility and all kinds of other things. So it's been a really different journey than most who kind of just stay in that core operations line. But I think it's really important because we often see people who are worried if they step out of that core ops line, project manager, superintendent, that they're somehow derailing their career. And what I've actually seen is the people that have done that, who have gotten their hands in different functions, different areas of the business and learned different things about our business, actually become more impactful and more valuable because they can see some of the challenges and the problems and the issues more holistically, right? Sometimes you can get pretty myopic in just operations. And so it's really an interesting opportunity. There's so much more to our business than just what you see and experience on a job site. There's so much more behind it. And I think really taking those opportunities to learn about all these different facets of our business can make you a really powerful and impactful player in the company, no matter what you choose to do. So that has been my experience, kind of assuming all these different roles and getting my hands in a lot of different things, but it's allowed me to learn about a lot of different areas of our business that I never otherwise would have by this point in my career.
I have a lot of follow-up questions to that because you just said something so impactful, and I've been hearing it a lot as well. Prior to the start of the webinar, we both talked about how we had both last week attended Women in Construction conferences. So Lauren was keynoting a conference in California while I was attending one in Washington, D.C. And so this came up a lot, learning the different facets of the business. So how did you personally go about doing that with Swinerton? You know, you mentioned you would talk to anyone who would listen, but what were you doing? Were you shadowing? Were you taking extra projects? How were you learning about different facets of the business that you were interested in? Because Swinerton's a very big company, right? So what are some tips for women as we do want to learn about the companies that we've made our homes? What do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, and you're going to hear this theme throughout this discussion, but relationships. You know, I've built a lot of great relationships with people across our business over the years, which has allowed me to ask a whole lot of questions. If anyone knows me, they know there is no shame in my game. If I don't know something, I'm curious, right? Be curious. I like to know things. And so if I don't understand something, if I hear a word, I don't know what that means, I won't hesitate to ask, either pull people aside or raise my hand and say, could you tell me what that means? And I think there's a lot of people in meetings or just otherwise who are somewhat afraid to ask questions because they think it'll make them look, you know, they think they should know the answer, right? And if they don't, they'll be judged for it. But what I've found is a lot of people don't know the answers to the same things you're not knowing the answers to. So I just ask a lot of questions when I don't understand something or don't know something. And then I think the other thing is kind of raising your hand for those volunteer opportunities. They're in every company. It's the company's favorite way to save on overhead, right? It's a volunteer position in addition to your day job. But those are great ways to get exposure to other people, other things. And then I think, you know, taking those big risks when coming back into BTech. I didn't know anything about technology, you know, or IT, but I thought it was interesting and I knew I could learn. And so I dove in, right? And then when Frank asked me one of our executives asked me if I would be interested in coming and building this craft services department. I was extremely concerned. I was like, well, I've never been a carpenter. I don't know if I could lead this, but I knew with him by my side, being able to kind of help me fill in the gaps of anything I didn't know, and having other resources and relationships throughout the business that could help shore me up where I was light in knowledge or expertise. You know, I think it's just being willing to take the risk and go for it.
So true. And, you know, that was a common theme with a lot of the panels at the WIC conference that I attended last week. And another thing that I mentioned to you that came up a lot was, you know, for women to elevate to leadership positions, there's absolutely a level of risk. You need to be fearless or practice being fearless and taking on some of those risks. But a lot of women talked about imposter syndrome. I mean, there's definitely a fear when you're taking on a new role in the company that you might not be as familiar in. You don't have your degree in that department or in that, you know, area. And, you know, we're all trying to make a living. A lot of us have families that we need to support. So what is your advice, and what were some of the things that you told yourself or that mentors might have told you when you were taking on these new roles that could prove to be a failure ultimately? So there's also that fear of failure that women deal with as we're trying to go through up to leadership positions. What was your advice, and what did you tell yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, men and women, have insecurities, right? Can I do this? Will I be credible? Will people take me seriously? But I think for me, again, having the people around you that can fill in those gaps and shore you up and support you, either as peers, as mentors, as reports, your team, it doesn't matter. But having the right people around you is just so key to that confidence, right? Knowing that if you don't know, someone else will, right? And you can pull them in. So I think just making sure you surround yourself with people that can work with you in a variety of different ways is really important to giving you confidence. I mean, I think just from growing up as an athlete, there's a certain level of failure. You know, you lose a game all the time, you get used to it. So I think, you know, there's a certain level of confidence and comfort, I guess, with if I fail, you know, it's okay. That kind of comes with being an athlete, you know, a young athlete. But I think a lot of it has to do with mindset too, right? Like, instead of, you know, if you do fail, it's kind of like, well, what's the worst that could happen, right? What's the worst case scenario? You fail. I mean, so I think sometimes just kind of talking yourself through, okay, so I fail, and then what, right? At the very least, you're going to learn something, and you're going to know something you didn't know before. So I think it's just really trying to find that comfort in failure, and just really sort of seeing those risks and challenges as opportunities to learn and grow. And even if you do fail, you're going to be better off for it. So it's kind of just trying to psych yourself up and change your mindset around failure and around challenge.
Other panelists, there was another panelist that also actually compared leadership roles to athletes. You know, she mentioned that athletes, when they fail, they show off. So a cyclist falls off their bike and shows their friends, sends a picture of, you know, the wound and says, look what happened to me this morning. And they're showing off their failures. And I think, you know, that discussion of not being afraid to fail and taking that risk. And not even being afraid to mention that you made a mistake. So one of the panelists mentioned that she did take on a new role in her company that she had been at for a very long time. And she ultimately went back to her supervisor and said, I made a mistake. This isn't for me. And they valued her and her work so much that they found a new position. They worked with her on that. So I think it also takes a level of vulnerability and, you know, fearlessness, which I think everyone can work on. So moving on, what are you most passionate about in your career?
So the short answer, the easy answer for me is the people side of the business, which I think is probably a little bit obvious in my career path, but I want to be a little bit more specific than that. Number one, I'm really passionate about developing a talent strategy that can best enable the business strategy. I find that really interesting and challenging, and it's always changing. So extremely passionate about that. And I think above all else, I'm really passionate about ensuring that as many employees as possible have the best employee experience at Swinerton and feel like they have every opportunity to achieve success at our company, however they define that word success. I really want people, our employees, to love this company and love their careers as much as I have and I do. And that kind of underlies everything that I do.
Spoken like a true leader. So what is the thing you are most proud of in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially spending my entire career at one company, the thing that I'm most proud of, hands down, is the relationships that I've built throughout my career, not just with external partners, but particularly with my colleagues, with the people that work in Swinerton, whether it's my team or people across the country or company, or our business leaders. I really appreciate that people across the business feel like they can call me about anything, anytime, challenges, opportunities that they see. I appreciate the trust and the confidence that people put in me with new ideas because of those long-standing relationships. Our culture at Swinerton is extremely relational, and in order to drive change in our company, those relationships are essential. So I'm really proud that I've been able to build strong relationships that allows me to drive change, and that I have the trust of people around me, even if they don't see the vision. Maybe sometimes they may not even believe it, be a little skeptical, but they get on board because of our relationships and the trust they have in me. And I'm really grateful for that, but also proud of it.
Okay, and then what is your greatest lesson learned, whether that came from a failure or a challenge you experienced, or whether it just came from what you're passionate about around your career?
Yeah,
What is that one or two lessons?
I think I have three. I think two, I'm still very much in the process of learning. So I'll talk about the one that I think I've learned that I'm pretty good with, and then the two that I'm very much in the process of learning. The one that I feel like I've really learned is that we have to value those relationships beyond the issue at hand, right? Whether it's a disagreement of opinion or even a matter of this is right and that's wrong. Now, I'm not talking about ethics or safety or legal issues, but I'm talking about things like math, right? No, this is the right answer, that's the wrong answer. So I think it's really important to always know that the relationship has to come first, and even articulate that when you're in the midst of a disagreement. Like, this relationship is important to me, so let's figure out how we can find that common ground. So I think relationships coming before the issue at hand is something that I learned early on, and I've learned it quite a few times since then. But I think I feel pretty good about that one. One of the two that I'm still actively working on is patience. I've always been somewhat impatient, but I think I tend to move really fast, too fast a lot of times. And I'm trying to be more cognizant about bringing others along, right? Everybody moves at a different pace. Some people need more time to kind of think and process things in order to provide input or get on board. But I think really giving others, whether it's your team or other leaders, the opportunity to come along with you instead of blowing by them and just expecting them to get on board, or even just being really thoughtful about when, it's all about timing, right? And there's a great book about that called When, W-H-E-N, but literally everything is about timing. And so just really being cognizant of the timing, the speed at which you're moving, the timing at which you're having conversations or doing things, is one that I'm actively working on. And the other one that I think I learned it really hard early on, and I still learn it now that I have a son, but it's knowing what's really important. At the end of the day, you have to know what's really important in your life, because it's all too easy to get caught up in the pace of work and all the problems and issues and things that are going on, you have to be so acutely aware of the sacrifices you're making for work, right? And the pace that you're running at. And I think this has become really palpable for me now with a 5-year-old at home, and I used to work through the weekend because I love work. It's not that I felt pressured. I just really like what I do, but really understanding I can't get this time back, right? And I think the other point in my career where this became extremely palpable for me was it was early on. It was in operations, and I was on a project that was full steam ahead. It was a hot mess too, just problems every day. Like, to be the project manager on that and to leave in the middle of it would have been, at the time it felt irresponsible, right? And at the time, my wife's mother was very sick, and she got a phone call that she needed to come home because her mom probably wasn't going to make it. And I opted to not go because I was like, well, I can't leave, and no one at work kind of knew about us. And so I just was like, well, I can't just leave the job because my roommate's mom is sick, and it just, I had it so wrong in that moment. And unfortunately, she ended up being alone without me, extremely upset, and I wasn't there. And in that moment, I knew I had made such a dumb decision to prioritize my work over what was really important. And I've had a couple of those moments. So I think that's just, especially in this business where the pace is so fast and there's every job site has a million problems. It's so easy to forget what really matters. So I just want to emphasize that for anyone who's listening, please don't forget what's really important.
That's so powerful too, because I think there's so much pressure on us as women to prove ourselves, to work. And it is a very fast paced, very serious industry with a lot of money, on the line. So I could see how you and other women could be put in that position. But I love how you said you really have to know yourself, right? Yep. Know yourself and know what's important. And in fact, at WIC, one of the giveaways they had while we were sitting at tables, and each table had like a key under their chair, and I was the lucky winner. And the giveaway was, I'm seeing it at my desk right there, 3001 questions that you need to ask yourself. And it's a book full of questions that I'll need to get through, but really to get to know yourself and know what's important both at work and at home, and self-care. So it's all important, because I think if we're lacking in one area, all the areas might suffer. So with that, I'm going to ask you one more follow-up question before we move to workforce and culture. But your tips for stress management, how do you take care of yourself in this very pressure industry, raising your son, having a family? There's a lot of, there's only so much of you to go around. So how do you manage it all and balance it all?
I mean, the first easy response is the Peloton. I have to work out to stay sane. I love having it in my house. We have the bike and the tread, and I'm really thinking about getting the rowing machine. Why not round it out? But working out is my way of staying sane. It is my therapy. It is everything. It's my separator. It's everything. So I think I work a lot of my stress out physically. I've always been that way. I think I'm probably not allowed to say wine, but it doesn't hurt in the evenings. And so, I think just finding the time to relax, with your family and your friends when you can. And I think for me, perspective is really important. There are times when I find myself, again, my wife is in medicine and she works with extremely sick children, and my worst day has never been as bad as some of her average days, telling parents that there's nothing she can do for their child. So it just really keeping perspective on things helps to pull that stress down a little bit and go, you know what, it's not the end of the world. So I think working out, wine, perspective, all three rounded out.
Same. So we're going to move on now. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us and letting us get to know you a little bit more. So now we're going to move to, I think, one of your passions, which is that culture and how you kind of, cater your culture so that you can make sure that all of your staff are working to their best capability, they have what they need, they're happy. And of course, women, because women are underrepresented in this industry. Now, first off, before we go into that, let's talk a little bit about the talent and the workforce today in construction. Both you and I have been working in this industry for a while. We were talking earlier about how we've seen it really change. Personally, feel like I'm really starting to see it change in the last 5 years, in the last couple of years even. It seems to start changing more rapidly. And maybe it's just because I'm more involved in these types of issues and going to these networking events where I didn't before. So that alone has really enlivened me. But what are you seeing? What is that outlook for talent? We know construction needs women. What are you seeing? What's the state in construction today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of start with the boring stuff, like just kind of the general industry trends. Job growth continues to be strong. Employment is back to pre-pandemic levels. We've still got the talent shortages we're dealing with all over the place, particularly for those roles that, you can't hang drywall remotely. So, particularly for those in-person workers, we're seeing the wage growth accelerate, just like a lot of other industries, particularly for new hires and our hourly employees, which I think is a good thing. Employers are spending more on benefits, so we're kind of feeling that pressure too. What other benefits and things can we offer? It does seem like leadership sentiment seems to be trending a little more positively as it pertains to the difficulties in hiring and recruiting. But that said, I think the talent market is going to remain hot for the foreseeable future. There's a lot of predictions flying around about the economy and recession. But for our industry that has such a backlog of longer term projects versus like a B2C company that's more susceptible to those immediate market fluctuations, the question really that I kind of look at is less the size of the recession, but the length of a potential recession. Usually takes about a year for us to start feeling real recessionary impacts as it pertains to available work to pursue, although we are starting to see job starts move out a little bit. But if this recession ends up being, assuming you believe there is one, ends up being a little shorter in nature, I don't think it's going to lighten the talent market all that much. Plus, within construction, we're so confined to a specific pool of talent with specific skill sets, especially on our job, superintendents, project managers, pre-construction managers. So this makes it especially difficult in core operations versus our non-core ops roles. I think we might see things lighten up a little in non-core ops. But while we may see job growth slow in the next few months and the number of job openings decline a little bit, I think the unemployment rate probably in 2023 will get 4.5–5%, which still isn't all that high. And I think we're going to see more people try to hold on to their talent through this recession, assuming it is a little bit shorter, because coming out of it, I think could be even more difficult. So I think that's going to become an interesting sort of talent challenge over the next, 6 to 12 months is, what do you do to hold on to people? Do you hold on to people? So I think that's going to be interesting. I think we're seeing a shift, in some newer skill sets that are going to be in more demand, like data analytics, robotics in the field, advanced digital technology. So we're really going to have to focus on both hiring that and developing that from within. I do think we are seeing more diverse talent coming into the industry. So we're seeing more women, more people of color, and I think I hope we'll continue to see that trend. So that's kind of an overall sort of boring workforce analysis that we're looking at.
Great. So we're seeing more women coming into the industry, and businesses are having, I think, to compete for talented workforce now. So how do we attract more women to the industry, more women to our businesses?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think number one, we have to be proactive, vocal advocates for the industry. We have to go out, talk about our experience in the industry, and highlight the successes of women in the industry. We've got to educate people about the opportunities in the industry, and then do a little bit of PR around it. I think, unfortunately, like most people only know, if you didn't grow up with a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister, an uncle, or an aunt in the business, then really all you know of it is what you see walking down the street, right? And if you're in a big city, you might see commercial construction. If you're driving down a suburb, you see home construction, which is very, very different, right? But then everyone just carte blanche applies that, oh, that must be construction, right? And people just don't know all of the many roles and what it entails. And I know when I went to business school, people ask me, you know, everyone's, what'd you do before business school? And I said I was in construction. And people literally thought I was swinging a hammer, which, by the way, there would have been nothing wrong with that if I had been swinging a hammer. But the point is, they had no idea all the other things that people did. And when I told them what a project manager did, everybody was like, whoa, that sounds really cool. It's like you're running your own little company, your own little business. I said, yeah, exactly. So I think it's really important that we take those opportunities in high schools and colleges, wherever we can, to go out and talk about our experiences in the industry and all the opportunities. I think it's really important to support benefits that will help attract and retain women, particularly parental leave, flexible work policies, and other things that alleviate challenges that coming with having children. I want to be clear, these are not female-only issues. However, research does show that in shared households, women still bear the majority of cooking, cleaning, laundry, and childcare responsibilities. And further, single parents represent 27% of current U.S. family groups raising children, and 80% of those individuals are female. So a lack of support in areas like parental leave and childcare issues really does disproportionately affect women. So we have to think about that in the benefits and the policies that we're offering at work. And then I think the other way to attract women is to go out and recruit in alternative places and from alternative majors. You know, even though we've made a lot of progress, I think the percent of women graduating with STEM degrees is now 30%, up from 10%, 20 or 30 years ago, but it's still not that many. But the reality is, you can come into this business. Our CEO says sometimes, he's like, one of the best PMs I ever knew was a psychology major, which is not shocking, by the way, because you're mostly dealing with people. And so I think we need to be really thoughtful about, hey, should we only be recruiting in engineering schools or CM programs? Maybe we can go to business schools or just the general like education schools, or School of Arts and Sciences. So I think really think about alternative majors. And one of the things that we do is, we're going back to the athlete theme, but recruiting student athletes. It's a great place to grab extremely diverse talent. And most student athletes already come with those sort of core soft skills and mindsets that we all crave. And so that can be another really creative place to get engaged is with student athlete programs.
Excellent, great points. So what does culture what does company culture factor in how we retain women workers? And I know you mentioned some things I think that definitely impact it.
Yeah, culture is huge, right? Getting women into the industry is going to be a moot point if we can't keep them. And the environment that they experience when they get here is going to be a huge determinant in whether they stay. So I think it's important women have to feel not just fully supported in their professional and personal lives, but they have to feel like they're included, that they're being proactively developed, mentored, and most importantly, advocated for in their careers. I think we need to be cognizant of the types of social events that we provide for employees to network both internally and externally, because these are really valuable opportunities to build key relationships with colleagues and leaders. And so if you're kind of noticing the same people always show up and the same people never show up, it's a good time to start asking questions like, am I holding a variety of events, right? We need to make sure we offer a variety of events. Notice that I'm not going to attribute any type of event to any specific gender. I'm just saying it's all about variety, right? To include as many people as possible. And I always say volunteering is a great catch-all opportunity to include everyone and do a little good while you're at it. And I think we have to really pay attention to bias in career development conversations. We've got to stop perpetuating stereotypes that women aren't confident or they're not dedicated to their work based on assumptions that we're making in our head versus observable behaviors that would support these assumptions. Research shows that it's not that women aren't confident, it's that more often than not, they're actively trying to avoid appearing confident to avoid the backlash effect that has been shown to occur with women who assert themselves. And further, so many people judge dedication to your work using the visibility of butt and seat as the sole criteria. And while this might be one potential indicator, there are many other observable behaviors that can indicate dedication to work. For example, responsiveness, productivity, pace of work, strength of relationships, and how about like actual business results, right? So evaluating dedication purely on the time I can visually see someone at their desk is not only short-sighted in my opinion, but it does disproportionately impact working parents. And then lastly, I think we need to make sure, and this is so important, I highlighted this pretty heavily last week in my keynote, but we need to make sure that our work culture is one of zero tolerance for nonsense. The leading causes of women leaving the industry are still lack of respect and harassment, particularly in the field. And there is just no reason for this to be happening on our job sites, in our offices, or any workplace for that matter in 2022. We have to call it when we see it, no excuses. And this is super critical for the men in our industry and for the superintendents in the field. We've got to stand up and speak up and have zero tolerance for inappropriate, offensive, dismissive, or disrespectful BS. It's crazy to me that that's still going on.
Excellent. I agree with every point you made. Thank you. So, a few more questions. What are some things that you have seen prove successful to advance women in the industry? You've talked about a few. Anything that you've seen that kind of stands out, whether it's a mentorship program or professional development, what have you seen have the most effect on advancing women?
Yeah, I mean, I think three things, and I just laid out some, but I'd like to really stress and you just mentioned it, the importance of mentorship and advocacy. Both of them together are very important. I've had many mentors, but more importantly, advocates in my career, and I can 100% confidently say that I would not be where I am today without all of those people. And it wasn't just any one of them by themselves, but it was the collective impact of all of them in different ways at different times throughout my career that was so powerful. So we all need to be identifying high potential females and doing what we can to develop their skills and capabilities and really advocate for them when those great career opportunities come up. I think additionally, we all tend to focus on individual employee competencies, which is extremely important, but we should also think about focusing on building complementary teams that collectively bring forth a variety of skills that are essential for business success. I think the focus on competency variety and complementarity is a great strategy for supporting the advancement of women versus focusing solely on a few specific skills. So for example, vulnerability and humility should be valued as much as confidence. Agreeableness and collaboration should be valued as much as competitiveness and assertiveness. Restraint should be valued as much as decisiveness. And again, I'm not attributing any of this to any particular gender. I'm just saying that a focus on the fact that all of it is needed together for the best decision and outcomes will allow room for a more diverse set of individuals on leadership teams. So I think really thinking about those collective team skills is important. And I think more importantly than anything, we have to stay in the game, right? We can't change this industry from the sidelines or from the outside. And I think one of the things I spoke a lot about last week is, yes, we want to progress the industry and move it forward. And hopefully there's a day where a bunch of women look back and go, what were they even talking about? But until that day, we have to figure out how to succeed despite the bias and the challenges, right? Because if we can't do that, if we opt out, we'll never change it. So I think it's really figuring out how we can stay in the game, even when it's tough, because it's so important. That's the only way we'll change it.
And you really need the support of your leadership, of the CEO. You know, these programs, when they are provided within a business, you know, research shows they're not as powerful if you don't have the buy-in from CEO down, right? So the importance of advocates is crucially important to make sure that all employees feel respected, safe within the workplace. I mean, it's something that we all deserve, right? So, and we'll be wrapping up soon, but how, and I know this is kind of a complicated question, but maybe just within a few minutes, you know, how do construction companies include diversity and inclusion within their hiring practices, within their company culture, kind of above and beyond that obligatory, here's your diversity online training, you know, make sure you complete this by this date. You know, what are some methods that we can really genuinely and productively incorporate more diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to all companies, but I can speak to some of the things that we've done or are trying to do right now at Swinerton. And I know that a lot of these are the similar things that are being deployed throughout the industry. But I think kind of starting with the hiring, you know, really being cognizant of your job advertisement language and scrubbing it for things that may cause women to disproportionately select out is important. I think making sure women are involved in the hiring process. We have to make sure that our interviewer panels are diverse, whether it's women or people of color, but you need to have diverse interviewer panels. Really, and this kind of goes both for hiring and for career promotion decisions, but it's really important to outline the specific competencies that you're looking for in your different roles and use objective criteria to evaluate those competencies, whether you're interviewing a candidate or whether you're considering someone for a promotion. You need to understand how are you going to evaluate that competency, right? And how are you going to do it as objectively as possible? But as much as you can, it's about specificity, right? Being specific in what you're looking for and how you're going to evaluate it, I think is really important. Paying attention to your data is essential, right? If you're not looking at your data, it's hard to know where you're at, how to get better, if you're getting better. So, you know, looking at things like, you know, what % of your applicants are female or people of color, you know, what's the proportion of women being offered interviews, what's the proportion of women getting offers, right, or accepting offers. Then you got to look at your whole pipeline. Where were we at 3 years ago? What were the hires, the terms, the promotions to, the promotions from, the current count, and you're looking for all, you know, where is there drop off? Where do we have issues? You have to be looking at your data, I think, to really affect change. Culturally, I think, you know, inclusive leadership training is really important. One of the things that we're really trying to do is define and articulate what inclusive leadership looks like for us at Swinerton. And then we're inserting that into a lot of our global training and development programs to really talk about what it means, what it looks like, feels like, sounds like to be an inclusive leader. Mentorship, everyone's got to have that mindset of like mentoring and coaching and advocating for others, right? And for all, not just the people you get along with or you naturally connect with, but really trying to look out there and be an advocate and a mentor to all of the people that you work with. I think is so important. And then I think another thing that's been really impactful, and I know a lot of companies are doing this, is, you know, the business resource groups or the employee resource groups, whatever, you know, every company kind of calls them something different. But, you know, we started our business resource groups about 3 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago. And, you know, I think those can be a really impactful thing for a company. It's a great network. It's a great community. It's a great way for people to kind of highlight, like, hey, here's some things you might consider thinking about or changing or doing differently. So it's a really great way to get ideas for making your organization better and to progress it forward for all employees. So I think those business resource groups are really impactful and have a lot of potential in the future.
How do you structure them? Like, are they staff brown bags? Are they, councils that meet regularly? How often do they meet?
Yeah, I mean, we're still trying to refine, what works best in this space. We are by no means experts, but I think some things that have worked well for us. Number one, we want it to be organic. We didn't say, okay, we're gonna have this group and this group and this group, and hey, you're gonna lead this one and you're gonna. We said we want to start business resource groups, but if you're, and if you are interested in starting one and you would like to lead one or just be part of one, please reach out and we'll help develop a charter and kind of get it going. We have executive sponsorship is really important, that senior leader in the business that can help, create communication amongst key people or whatever that is. But we find the executive sponsor, we have the leader or co-leads of the BRG who have volunteered and said, I'd like to do this. And then it becomes sort of an organic thing, which I think is really important. I don't think it would work trying to go, oh, we're going to do that. And, so I think that's been most important, is just letting it sort of happen and then guiding those groups into how to operate and what to do. But, they do a good job of being pretty self-sufficient in a sense, right? Like they get together, they meet, they have different, they have an awareness subcommittee and a retention subcommittee and, a recruiting subcommittee. So they do a pretty good job of making things happen and making their voices heard. But yeah, I think it's really just creating those connections with the right other key leaders in the business that can affect change when they have some really good ideas, and making sure that they're a part of those conversations.
And we've started groups like this, similar to this in AIA Contract Documents too. And I think one of the byproducts that was a little bit unexpected of these groups, or having a women's group or brown bag. So I actually interview women staff in our company, much like I'm interviewing you, but for an internal staff brown bag. So not only are we learning and sharing expertise and experience, we started to really get to know each other better. And I think for some companies that are 100% remote like we are, that was a very positive product, because again, it's about building those relationships and getting to know each other. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you one more question and then we're gonna open it up for questions, because a few questions have come in. So I like to end these interviews with, if there's one skill every woman in this industry should master, what would it be? Or if it's one trait of a leader that's your favorite, what, in your opinion, is that trait? So skills and traits.
So I want to highlight, this is not specific to women, but I think it will give anyone a leg up who can do it. But I think the ability to build trusted relationships with a broad group of people, particularly those who are different from you or that you don't have a natural connection with, is so key. And I think emotional intelligence plays a huge role in this, right? The ability to read a room, the audience, environment, context, tone, and adapt your communication style, the content of your communication to meet the moment, even if it's just a one-on-one conversation, is so essential to building those relationships with many different people, right? I think it's all too easy to build the relationships with the people we connect with and ignore the ones we don't. But as a leader, you have to really be proactive and intentional about building those relationships, particularly with the people that you don't have natural connections with. And I think that requires being really tuned in to the moment, to the context, and being able to almost be a chameleon, not in an inauthentic way, but in a way that makes it safe for the other person.
Excellent. There's so much to think about and reflect on from this session, Lauren. So I want to thank you so much. And I'm going to open it up for questions now. We've got about 6 minutes and we've got a lot of questions in the chat. So I'll start off with the first comment. Thank you so much for your honesty and openness, Lauren, from Megan. Thank you, Megan, for your comment. All right, here's a long question. Let me read this out first. So Lauren mentioned early on that bringing them along instead of blowing through. Would Lauren give a couple more examples of how she manages to change? Thank you, Lauren, for pointing out that the zero tolerance at the workplace. And how about passive aggression? How does Lauren deal with that general trait among men and women in the industry? Bring them along instead of blow through. So yeah. So I think those are all of her comments.
Yeah.
What do you want to tackle first?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'll just go for it. And if I don't answer it, I'm sorry. But, you know, I think it was interesting to tie those two things together, because I hadn't thought of that. So I'm on my heels a little bit in a good way. Because when I was thinking of being patient and bringing others along, I was just kind of thinking of like general ideas, right? I want to change this, I want to do that, right? And here's the vision, bop, 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 and go, you know, and not giving other people the opportunity to process. So that's where my head was. And then, you know, on the zero tolerance and kind of progressing, you know, on diversity and inclusion, I almost had them as separate topics, right? But I think that's really important and interesting that you tied those two together, because it's something we've been talking a lot about, is like, and I think I'm going to be really careful here because you know, I'm live and I don't want to say anything that offends anyone or makes anyone mad, but I think it's really important to recognize, like, in our industry in particular, we have all walks of people. And to be truly inclusive, you have to include as many different people and the way they think and feel. And it is so hard in today's sort of hyper political environment. But the point is, there's politics and there's perspectives on political issues, and then there's just straight up right and wrong. And I think most of us can align around straight up right and wrong, right? Versus all the other, you know, I think on the what, most of us align. It's the how where everybody's different. And so I think that's where, you know, to progress our industry, particularly around social issues, DEI, we have to, if we try to move too fast, if we just try to shove it down the industry's throat, I believe we will fail. I don't believe that is an inclusive approach to progression. I think in order to progress our industry, we have to respect the fact that some of this is new for people. We have a lot of different people, and the best thing that we can do is progress our industry at a pace. We need to move at a reasonable pace here. We don't have time to wait 3,000 years for the world to be, you know, a better place to live in. But that said, if we try to just jam it in, it's not going to work anyway. And so finding that sweet spot, that pace where we can let people think about it, we can have the conversations, let people say how they feel about it, give their feedback, and we're moving at a pace that allows them to come along with us on this journey, as opposed to just shoving it down their throats and going, get on board or don't work here. I don't think that's the way to go. And so I think that is of particular importance on these issues. And I'm glad you brought that up in the question, because if we don't bring as many people along as possible on this journey, it will fail. It will ultimately fail, particularly in our industry. I know other industries are a little bit different, but particularly ours. Hopefully, I won't show up in the news tomorrow about having said something.
So you are getting a lot of love in the comments. Let's see. And for people who are asking, yes, this is recorded. It will be emailed to all registrants, and it will be uploaded to the AIA Contract Documents YouTube channel too. Another comment, just wanted to say thank you and would love to listen to Lauren's wise words again. Zero tolerance is a big one, and we all need to hear more. Let me go through some more questions. Thank you so much, Lauren. I really appreciate the suggestion to create authentic relationships built on trust with people that are different from you. It's so refreshing to hear that. I hope more people will put that into practice. Awesome webinar. I'm so glad I tuned in today. I've been working in construction for over 25 years, and I hope that leaders like Lauren keep the conversations happening. Thankful for women like her speaking up and sharing her experience. Thank you, Elaine. Such an excellent approach. Change at a reasonable pace. Needed to hear that today. That's from Brenna. And then what sport do you play, and how do you manage a situation with the boss who likes to be the star in every room and won't give you the space to grow, lead, and fly? What are the next steps if you've had a candid conversation with this boss about your needs and wants, but things aren't changing?
Oh, that's a big one. I think there was something about sports in there, but that was easy. So the better question is what sport didn't I play? But soccer, field hockey, basketball, tennis were my big ones. Hope I didn't miss an important one there. Let's see. I have been extremely fortunate in my career. I won't lie. I have never worked for a bad boss or manager ever. I have only had fantastic managers in my career, and which I am deeply grateful for and totally understand that might be a very unique experience. So please know that any advice I give in this space is, I've never actually dealt with it, but I think, I was just listening to on my Peloton yesterday, the instructor say, never negotiate your value, always know your worth. And I think if you have tried to have those conversations and nothing is changing, know your value and move on. I mean, I am not here for the quiet quitting train. I think it's crazy. I'll throw that out there. But let me say this. I don't think anyone should have to put up with a toxic work environment or a toxic manager or a bad manager for that matter. If you don't like it, find one that's great, but don't just quiet quit, because that's not going to help you succeed in the long run either, right? And so depending on how you define success. So I think, again, I have been very fortunate to not have been faced with that situation. But what I do know is that if I were ever doing that to someone on my team, I would want to know, and hopefully I would change. But if I didn't, I wouldn't be shocked to see him move on.
Know your value. I love that as the theme of the webinar. Now, everyone, there's still a lot of questions. We have to end now for respect of everybody's time. So I did ask Lauren for resources that impacted her in her career. This is actually a professor of hers. So we've linked to some resources that he's provided. It'll be in the PowerPoint. We'll email you the PowerPoint as well, so please check it out. I love this Parents Who Lead. I'm going to be reviewing that shortly. Let me just go through. Let's start a dialogue. We have these hashtags, Women in Construction, ACD Breaking Barriers. If anything Lauren said today really impacted you or you want to share it on social media, please do. Our next session is going to be Women of the AIA Documents Committee. This is going to take place November 14th. We have 3 architects that are part of our documents committee who are, like Lauren, going to be talking about their experience in the design industry. The registration link is here. You can also find it on our Learn page. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending. And Lauren, thank you for taking the time. You are obviously not only a powerful leader in this realm, but you're also a very powerful speaker who eloquently can talk about so many issues that are affecting us today. And you're motivating so many of us as it's coming through in the chat. So please keep doing what you're doing, keep keynoting and keep speaking about these issues, because it matters to us. It matters to women in this industry, and you have a lot of wisdom to share. So with that, everybody, thank you all for taking the time and letting us go a few minutes over, and enjoy your day and know your value. Thank you, Lauren.